The Thorntons were the kind of family that made neighbors whisper with admiration. Their home sat on a quiet, tree-lined street in Auckland, New Zealand, with white walls that gleamed against the evening sun and a garden so carefully trimmed it looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. James Thornton was the center of it all. A lawyer with a spotless reputation, he was the man everyone turned to when they needed free advice, a sponsor for a local event, or a voice of wisdom at community gatherings. He dressed immaculately, spoke with charm, and carried himself with a confidence that made men envy him and women call him the perfect husband. Helen, his wife, was the picture of elegance. She was tall, soft-spoken, and graceful in the way she carried herself. Women in the neighborhood envied her. They thought she was lucky to have such a devoted husband, the kind of man who opened car doors and made grand speeches about love at every anniversary dinner. And then there was Amelia, their only child. A little girl with dark curls and bright brown eyes, she was described as an angelic by her teachers. But if anyone looked closely enough, they would notice something off. Amelia rarely spoke, hardly laughed, and never let anyone hug her for too long. Teachers told her mother she was painfully shy. Other parents whispered that she was simply odd. What no one knew was that the perfect Thornton home was a stage. Behind its shining walls, the family lived in a nightmare. Helen knew it first. Her marriage, which outsiders called a fairy tale, was a prison. James Thornton, the respected lawyer, was a beast when the doors shut behind him. The same hands that shook judges' palms in court were the ones that left purple marks on her arms. His voice, which could sway juries, roared insults into her ears late at night. And the smile he gave his neighbors was the same mouth that spat venom at her in the privacy of their bedroom. Helen learned to live with it. She painted her face with heavy makeup to cover the bruises, wore long sleeves in summer, and rehearsed her smiles in the mirror. Every time someone said, "You're so lucky," she felt a hollow ache in her chest. Amelia saw more than anyone realized. At 6, she had already learned how to read the air, how to freeze at the sound of her father's footsteps, how to know whether dinner would end in laughter or in broken plates. But nothing prepared her for what happened when she turned 7. It was a quiet night. Helen had gone upstairs early, feigning a headache. James came into Amelia's room with a softness that was strange to her. He sat on her bed, stroked her hair, and whispered about how much he loved her, how special she was. At first, she thought it was one of his rare tender moods. But the tenderness twisted into something else, something that stole her innocence and left her trembling. When it was over, James looked at her with cold eyes.
"You will never tell anyone,"
he said.
"If you do, I'll make sure no one believes you. Do you understand?"
Amelia nodded, too terrified to speak. That night, she learned 2 things: her father's love was a lie, and her mother's silence was not ignorance, it was fear. Helen had walked past the door, paused for a moment, then kept moving. She knew. But she couldn't stop him. From then on, Amelia's world shrank. She stopped laughing in school. She stopped raising her hand in class even when she knew the answers. At birthday parties, she sat alone, clutching her slice of cake while the other children played. She avoided the touch of her teachers, even when they tried to comfort her. Her teachers called her timid. Neighbors called her strange. What they didn't know was that Amelia carried a secret too heavy for a child's shoulders. At home, the cycle continued. Helen became a shadow of herself, a woman who lived only to survive each day. Amelia, still a child, carried bruises on her heart that no one could see. Every time her father appeared at a community function, smiling, giving speeches, winning awards, Amelia's stomach turned. She wanted to scream, to tell everyone who he really was. But every time she opened her mouth, she saw his face, the cold eyes, the warning voice, the threat that he would ruin her if she spoke. So she stayed silent. The irony was cruel. The more Amelia withdrew, the more people excused her behavior. She's shy, they said. That's just her personality. Some thought she was spoiled. Others thought she was simply different. No one thought to ask why the child of such a perfect family looked so broken inside. At night, Amelia lay awake listening. Sometimes it was her mother crying in the next room. Sometimes it was her father's angry shouts. Sometimes it was the heavy silence that meant something terrible had already happened. She would clutch her blanket and bite her lip, telling herself not to cry, because crying only made her father angry. And so, in a house admired by the world, a little girl's soul was slowly being crushed. On the outside, they were perfect. Inside, they were burning. Amelia would later remember those years as the beginning of her silence, the years when she learned that the world would rather believe in a perfect lie than face an ugly truth. But even then, a small voice inside her whispered that one day, she would find a way to speak. By the time Amelia turned 15, she had perfected the art of invisibility. She walked through school corridors like a shadow, avoiding conversations, avoiding touch. Her classmates had long stopped trying to include her in games or projects. Teachers spoke about her in staff rooms. She's bright, but she won't open up. At home, she was something else entirely, a prisoner dressed in fine clothes. James had taken complete control. He gave her gadgets, expensive dresses, and money, as if material gifts could erase the nightmares he carved into her. Helen, once a fragile presence in the house, had grown more like a ghost. She barely spoke, her eyes dull with resignation. It was in this house of silence that the anniversary night arrived. James went all out that year. Their marriage had reached its 20th anniversary, and he wanted the world to see perfection magnified. A marquee was erected in their backyard, filled with white roses and glittering lights. Waiters in black uniforms moved gracefully between tables with trays of champagne flutes. The air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive perfume. Neighbors came, colleagues came, even a few local politicians. They raised their glasses and toasted to James and Helen.
20 years of love,
Someone said, and the crowd clapped. Helen smiled, her practiced smile, flawless beneath layers of foundation that hid fresh bruises. Amelia sat at a corner table, wearing a cream-colored dress her father had picked. People glanced at her occasionally, murmuring about how quiet she was, how different from other teenagers. She kept her eyes fixed on her plate, stabbing at roasted potatoes she couldn't eat. Her father was the star of the evening. He gave a speech so moving that women wiped their eyes and men clapped their backs. He spoke about love, loyalty, and family, words that tasted like ash to Amelia. She wanted to scream in that moment, to rip off the mask he wore. But she sat still, because the weight of his threats pressed down on her chest like iron. The party ended with music and laughter. Guests staggered home, intoxicated with food, wine, and admiration for the Thorntons. The house, once buzzing with chatter, fell into silence. It was in that silence that Amelia woke to the sound of her mother's voice. Not words, cries. Muffled, desperate cries. She sprang from bed, her heart pounding. She knew the rhythm of her mother's sobs too well. Barefoot, she crept down the hallway. The sound led her to her parents' bedroom, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Her father's hands were around her mother's throat. Helen clawed at his arms, her legs kicking weakly against the floor. Her face was purple, her eyes bulging. James's face was twisted in fury, veins bulging at his temples. Amelia froze. For a moment, her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. Then her body moved on instinct.
stop,
she screamed, her voice cracking. James turned, his grip loosening for a split second. But it was too late. Helen's body went limp. Her arms fell to the ground, her eyes glassy and lifeless. Amelia stumbled back, her stomach heaving. Her scream tore through the house, but James was on her in seconds, his hand clamping over her mouth. His face was terrifyingly calm now.
You will not say a word.
He hissed into her ear.
Do you understand? If you do, you'll end up just like her.
Tears streamed down Amelia's face. She nodded, too terrified to resist. When the police arrived an hour later, called by a neighbor who had heard the scream, James was ready. He wore grief like a tailored suit. His story was rehearsed, flawless.
My wife, my dear Helen.
He sobbed, clutching his head.
She's gone. And it was an accident. My daughter.
He gestured at Amelia, who stood in shock, trembling.
She was excited after the party. They were playing. Things got out of hand.
The officers turned to Amelia.
Is this true?
One asked gently. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked at her father's face, those same cold eyes daring her to speak. She remembered his hand over her mouth, the threat still burning in her ears. So she said nothing. The silence was taken as confirmation. One officer placed a hand on her shoulder.
We know you didn't mean it.
He said softly.
You're free to go.
James stepped forward, wrapping an arm protectively around her.
She's just in shock.
He said.
I'll take care of her.
And just like that, the case was closed before it even began. But outside, the whispers started. Neighbors who had toasted her mother hours earlier now eyed Amelia with suspicion. The girl killed her mother. They said it in lowered voices, in passing glances, in pitying stares. Teachers avoided her, students mocked her in whispers. She's troubled, they said. She's sick in the head. Poor James. First his wife, now a broken daughter. Amelia carried the weight of their judgment in silence. She carried the weight of the truth too, the truth that her father was not grieving, not broken, but victorious. He had killed her mother, framed her, and walked away a hero. That night, as she lay in bed, Amelia made herself a promise. She could not speak now. But one day, she would. And when she did, the world would finally know the monster behind the perfect man. From the outside, James Thornton appeared to be a grieving husband and a protective father. Neighbors praised his resilience, calling him a man of strength, carrying on for the sake of his daughter. At church, he gave generous donations in Helen's memory. At work, colleagues applauded his ability to argue cases with even more passion. To the community, he was still the man who could do no wrong. But for Amelia, life after her mother's death was a prison that wore the mask of comfort. James became more possessive than ever. He insisted on buying her the newest clothes, the latest phone, jewelry far too expensive for a teenager. You deserve the best, he would say, slipping a diamond bracelet on her wrist. But Amelia knew the truth. Every gift was a chain, every luxury another bar of her gilded cage. At night, the abuse continued. He called her his special one, his second chance at love. It made Amelia sick, but she endured, her body stiff with hatred. She had no one to confide in. Teachers avoided her, students mocked her as the girl who killed her mom, and neighbors whispered when she passed. Sometimes, Amelia thought about ending it all. There were nights when she stared at the pills in the medicine cabinet, nights when she pressed a razor against her skin just to feel something other than numbness. But each time, she stopped. Not because she wanted to leave, but because a small ember inside her whispered, if you die, he wins. And the truth dies with you. That ember kept her alive. It was during one of her father's business trips that Amelia first allowed herself to plan. She went into his study, a room she was forbidden to enter, and found files, letters, receipts. She began to understand the pattern of his control. She found alcohol-stained shirts he had hidden, credit card statements with unexplained purchases, and a drawer full of documents locked away. That was when she realized evidence was her only weapon. Quietly, she began collecting it. She kept a diary hidden inside a false bottom of her school bag, writing every detail, dates, words he spoke, what he did. She plucked stray hairs from his suits, folded them in tissue, and stored them in a box beneath her bed. Once, she secretly recorded him on her phone when his drunken rage spilled into threats. She hid the file in cloud storage, under a name so ordinary no one would notice. The more she collected, the more she felt the ember of resistance grow. But survival wasn't just about evidence. It was also about learning. Amelia began reading articles late at night on the school library's computer, stories of abuse, survival guides, anonymous forums. She learned about shelters, hotlines, support groups. She learned that there were women who had escaped monsters like her father and lived to tell their stories. Yet every time she thought of calling one of those hotlines, fear strangled her. What if they didn't believe her? What if they told her father? She imagined his voice in her ear.
No one will ever take your side. You're mine now.
So she stayed silent, but she prepared. One day, her father caught her sneaking out to a bookstore. He slapped her so hard she tasted blood.
Don't ever think you can run,
he said, his voice sharp as glass. For a moment, Amelia wanted to crumble, to give up her quiet rebellion. But when she lay in bed that night, the sting still burning on her cheek, she whispered to herself,
I will leave. Not today. Not tomorrow. But one day.
She started saving. It was almost laughable. How could a teenager hide money from a man who controlled every cent? But Amelia was clever. She skimmed small amounts from the cash he gave her for treats, slipping coins into an old pencil case. Slowly, the pencil case grew heavier. It wasn't much, but it was hers. By 15, Amelia had learned to live two lives. By day, she was the silent, broken girl everyone pitied or avoided. By night, she was a quiet soldier, gathering her weapons, evidence, knowledge, money, and patience. Still, the house suffocated her. Every corner smelled of her mother's absence. Every mirror reflected her father's shadow. And every night, she listened to the sound of his footsteps, never knowing if he would pass her door or push it open. But Amelia held on. She told herself she wasn't just surviving for herself. She was surviving for Helen. Her mother's silence had killed her as surely as James's hands. Amelia refused to let silence bury her too. And so, though her prison remained, the girl inside it was no longer only a victim. She was waiting. She was learning. She was planning. One day, the mask would fall. And when it did, James Thornton would finally face the truth he had buried beneath his perfect smile. Amelia's plan began as fragments, scribbles in her diary, scraps of overheard conversations, whispers from articles she read on the school library computer. Over time, the fragments sharpened into a single thought: I can't stay here. If I do, I'll die like Mom. But escaping James Thornton wasn't like running away from any other parent. He was a man who thrived on control. He tracked her movements, questioned her every outing, even examined her phone for signs of secrets. He had built walls around her life, invisible but unbreakable. Or so he thought. Amelia worked in silence. Every night, she checked the evidence she'd gathered, her diary, the recorded audio of his threats, the hidden box of hair strands, the jewelry with fingerprints. She wrapped them in layers of fabric and placed them in a shoebox under her bed, the kind of ordinary hiding place James would never stoop to check. She also grew bolder. Once, she found his laptop open and slid a USB stick into the port, copying emails that revealed his dealings with clients, bribes, hidden accounts, off-the-record payments. She didn't even understand all of it, but she knew enough that Honorable James Thornton was not only a monster at home but a criminal in the courtroom. Still, fear was her constant companion. One evening, James came home early. Amelia had left her diary out on her desk. She heard his footsteps on the stairs and barely had time to shove it under her pillow before he entered.
What are you writing?
He asked, his tone deceptively casual.
School stuff.
She replied, forcing her voice not to shake. James studied her, his eyes sharp. For a moment, Amelia thought he knew. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. But then he nodded, kissed her forehead, and left. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow, not from weakness but from the sheer terror of how close she'd come to losing everything. She couldn't afford another mistake. Amelia's savings grew slowly. She stuffed coins and small bills into the old pencil case until it bulged. Once, she used part of the money to buy a cheap prepaid phone from a corner shop, lying to the cashier that it was a gift for her cousin. That phone became her lifeline, hidden under a loose floorboard in her room. Through it, she searched for shelters, women's support groups, escape stories. Most nights, she just scrolled, reading in silence, her chest tightening with both hope and fear. But escape wasn't just about running. She needed someone to trust. And trust was the one thing she had never known. She began emailing a survivor support group under an alias, Lily. At first, her messages were vague, talking about a girl she knew. But the replies came back warm, patient, encouraging. They told her about shelters across Auckland, about people who would believe her, about how silence was the abuser's strongest weapon. It was the first time in her life Amelia felt a thread of connection. Then came the opportunity. James had a conference in Wellington. He was due to be gone for 3 days. Usually, he dragged Amelia along, parading her as his obedient daughter. But this time, he said she was better off staying home with the housekeeper. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, Amelia's body buzzed with adrenaline. She waited an hour, pacing her room, before she acted. She retrieved her shoebox, her pencil case of savings, and her prepaid phone. She packed them into a backpack along with a few clothes. Her hands trembled as she walked out the door. Every step felt like it weighed 100 kilos. The housekeeper barely looked up as Amelia muttered something about going to the library. Outside, the cold New Zealand air hit her face, sharp and freeing. It was the first time she had ever walked out without his permission. She made her way to a bus stop, her heart hammering with every passing car, terrified she would see his black sedan appear around the corner. When the bus finally came, she climbed on, clutching the backpack to her chest. Her destination, a women's shelter she had memorized from an email. The ride was long, and with every passing stop, Amelia's fear battled with hope. At one moment, she imagined James bursting through the bus doors, dragging her out by her hair. At the next, she imagined freedom, her voice finally being heard. When the bus stopped near the shelter, Amelia stepped off. The building wasn't remarkable, just a small house tucked between shops, with a sign that read, "Safe Haven." She stood frozen on the pavement, staring at the door. Her legs felt heavy, her throat tight. A voice inside her whispered, "Go back. He'll find you. He'll kill you." But another voice, stronger this time, rose inside her, "If you go back, you're already dead." Amelia walked up the steps and knocked. The door opened, and a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and tired smile lines, looked at her.
Hello, love.
The woman said softly.
You're safe now. Come in.
For the first time in 8 years, Amelia stepped into a space that did not belong to her father. The first time she stepped into a counselor's office, she almost turned back. The room was warm, painted in soft yellows, a vase of daisies on the table. Too cheerful. Too dishonest. Nothing in her life had ever been yellow. The woman waiting inside introduced herself as Meredith, a trauma therapist recommended by a community outreach program. Her voice was low, deliberate. She didn't push. She didn't smile too brightly. She simply asked,
Would you like some tea?
The girl, 15, gaunt, her eyes hollow from secrets, nodded once. For weeks, that was all their sessions were. Tea. Silence. Meredith filling the gaps with stories of her own garden, her dog, or the stubborn way New Zealand rain soaked every umbrella. Slowly, something inside her softened. And then, one day, she said it. Not in a loud voice, not even looking up. Just a whisper.
My father hurts me.
The words hung in the air like smoke. Meredith didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a pen. She only said,
You are safe here.
Safe. It was the first time the girl had heard that word used about her. The world outside wasn't safe. People still stared at her on the streets, mothers tugged their children closer. She was the girl who had killed her own mother, whether they believed the accident story or not. Teachers avoided her, students whispered. Even her aunt, who occasionally visited, treated her like something fragile and half-broken. But therapy gave her something her home never had, a place where she was believed. Meredith suggested a support group, small, confidential meetings in a community center in Wellington where survivors of abuse could talk without fear of being silenced. The first time, the girl sat in the back, arms crossed, her throat tight. The others spoke first, a woman whose husband had broken her ribs, a boy who had grown up in foster homes, a grandmother who had carried secrets for 50 years. And then they turned to her. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. But she spoke. Not everything, not at once, but enough. Enough to feel the weight shift from her chest, to realize silence had been the heaviest chain of all. Breaking silence wasn't easy. The father she returned home to each night was still the same, smiling to neighbors, venomous in private. He sensed the shift in her, the way she no longer flinched quite as quickly, the way her eyes held a spark. He threatened her more often, hissed about how he had saved her from prison, and how no one would ever believe her if she tried to expose him. But she no longer lived entirely in his shadow. She began to gather things with more care, photographs of her mother's bruises hidden under makeup, torn diary pages, the bloodied shirt she had kept from the night of the killing. She stored them in a box beneath loose floorboards, each piece a weapon for a day that hadn't yet come. And she began saving. He gave her money freely, hush money, control disguised as generosity. She tucked away portions, hiding them in envelopes inside library books she never returned. Slowly, she built her escape. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence. It was learning to believe she deserved freedom. Meredith worked with her on that, too.
You were a child.
Meredith said firmly one day when guilt spilled from her like floodwater.
You are not your father's crimes. You are not your mother's silence. You are not the lies people tell about you.
She cried for hours after that session, the kind of shaking sobs she had never allowed herself before. But afterward, she felt cleaner, as if grief itself had been poison she needed to vomit out. The turning point came the night she stood outside her father's office, listening as he rehearsed a speech for a charity gala. He spoke of justice, of protecting families, of being a pillar of the community. The words were honeyed, perfect. And she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Hatred burned in her stomach, yes. But underneath it, a steadier flame glowed, resolve. She wasn't ready yet. Not completely. But one day, she would drag every hidden truth into the light. That night, she returned to her room and opened her notebook. For the first time in years, she wrote not about pain, but about a future. A plan. And she titled the first page in shaky handwriting. The Day He Falls. The rain came heavy the morning she decided. Thick, silver sheets hammered the roof of her father's house, drowning the world in noise. It felt like a cleansing, a storm she had been waiting for all her life. She was 17 now. Stronger, taller, no longer the hollow-eyed child who had once cowered in silence. The evidence she had gathered over 2 years lay carefully packed in a waterproof folder, photographs, diary pages, bruised memories carved into proof. She had even recorded his threats, slipping her phone into her pocket whenever his temper burned. It was enough. But evidence alone didn't topple men like her father. Men like him wore masks too well. They hid behind polished shoes, perfect speeches, the illusion of virtue. She needed allies, and this time, she had them. Meredith had connected her with a lawyer who worked with survivors. A woman named Fiona, sharp-eyed, unshakable. Fiona didn't flinch when she saw the folder. She didn't doubt.
We'll do this carefully,
Fiona said.
It will be slow, it will be brutal, but you will not face it alone.
Those words, not alone, were the anchor she had needed. The case built quietly. Depositions. Recorded testimonies from the support group about her stories over time. Financial inconsistencies traced through her father's accounts. The pattern of control and violence pieced together like a puzzle. She still lived in the house during those months, a double life sharper than any blade. By day, she played the obedient daughter. By night, she whispered secrets into Fiona's recorder, each confession strengthening the wall of truth she was constructing. Her father sensed something. He grew restless, suspicious. He demanded her phone, rifled through her drawers. But she was careful, meticulous, always one step ahead. For once, the fear was his. The trial drew the whole community. The courthouse in Wellington buzzed with whispers, the perfect lawyer, the grieving widower, accused by his own child. Impossible. When she stepped into the witness box, her knees nearly gave way. Every pair of eyes in the room seemed to bore into her, some curious, some hostile, some pitying. Her father sat at the defense table in his press suit, his lips curled in a smile too polished to be real. But then Fiona's voice steadied her.
Take your time.
Fiona said gently.
Tell the court what happened in your own words.
And she did. For the first time, without whispering, without hiding, she told everything. The abuse. The nights of terror. The way her mother's death had been twisted into her crime. The years of silence. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled, but she did not stop. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Then Fiona laid out the folder. The photographs. The recordings. The hidden diary pages in her mother's handwriting. He will kill me one day, and no one will believe her. The mask slipped. For the first time, the community saw her father not as the hero, but as the predator he had always been. The verdict took days, but the tide had already turned. Neighbors who once avoided her now whispered apologies in the hallway. Reporters who had praised her father's sacrifice now dug into his financial scandals, his hidden life. When the guilty verdict came, murder, abuse, obstruction, the air in the courtroom broke like a held breath. Her father's smile vanished. He looked at her then, eyes blazing, but it was too late. His power had dissolved. She didn't cry when they took him away in handcuffs. She didn't smile either. She only breathed, deep, steady, free. Healing was not instant. She still woke some nights to echoes of her mother's screams, still flinched at footsteps in the hallway. But therapy continued. The support group became her family. And slowly, she rebuilt herself not from the ruins of her past, but from the strength of surviving it. At 20, she left New Zealand for the first time. Not running, but choosing. She studied social work, determined to stand for others the way Meredith and Fiona had stood for her. She wrote her story one page at a time, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had broken the cycle. And one rainy evening, years later, she returned to Wellington, not to the house that held her nightmares, but to the community center where she had first whispered her truth. She stood before a new circle of survivors, her voice steady.
My name is...
She paused, inhaled.
And I am not what he made me. I am free.
The room erupted in soft applause, nods of belief, faces glowing with the recognition of shared strength. She had come full circle. The girl who once carried silence now carried a voice. A voice strong enough to echo through every courtroom, every shadowed home, every corner where secrets still thrive. Her father had fallen. And she had risen.